Okay, hi. I'm gonna be here today to really share with you the thought process and probably the general process of how I go about doing my work, and just kind of run you maybe kind of like a short timeline of what I've done since I kind of came out to the professional world to work as a creative. And you will kind of see a little bit of that progress, a little bit of the behind the scenes of how I grew as a creative. I use the word creative because I think I've gone through several stages in my career, and I'm also, I guess you could say, like a jack of all trades. I mean, I love anything that's creative, and anything that I can kind of work with my hands. And you kind of see that kind of manifesting over my career, especially being really curious about my environment.
Well, where were you in this place?
Good question. I was wondering anybody would ask that. This is actually in an island of Bintan. So Bintan is in Indonesia, which is really close to Singapore, but this is another island. It's called Nicoy Island that's off Bintan. So it's an island off an island. So yeah, I think the title of today's sharing or masterclass was Art and the Environment, but after kind of thinking about it, I think it should be probably more suitable if I title it Art and My Environment. It's really actually my environment that shapes me and shapes my work, and it affects everything from what I see, where I travel to, and it affects my thought process as well. The environment deciding what I do. Sometimes I don't get to decide what I want to do, as strange as that sounds. So I think to kind of dive into that, I think one very central aspect of this kind of relating to my environment, or anybody relating to their environment, is always a relationship. And that's first and foremost where I usually start, and looking at any kind of particular issues or any kind of particular subjects that I'm interested in. And as you know, relationships can be complicated, can be, well, I mean, it can be simple relationships as well. It doesn't have to be complicated. But what I meant is relationships always have an up and down, have push and pull, have slow periods, have fast periods. And you know, it's not always black and white. It's fluid. Sometimes there's tensions. So it really depends on the relationship between two entities and the two entities that's in that relationship. And I say two because, of course, we can have multiple entities in one relationship. But when I say two, I guess it's kind of sharing about how I kind of relate relationship in my kind of my work process. So when I say two, it's, for me, it's usually these two things. It's exploring and then understanding. And that's, or usually, the main way I kind of embark on a project, right? And this is how the relationship starts. I would think this could possibly apply to most things about relationship. And how do you understand it? You explore, you read about it, you research, you do whatever you can to go and understand the subject. But then when you reach the understanding, suddenly you find that, actually there's something that I don't understand. Then you go back to exploration again. You reread the text, or you revisit the site again, and then you find something else that you don't understand. So this entire process is quite circular in that way. But of course, actually, in reality, it looks more something like that, right?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, right. So you get to a point, you found something after exploring, you found this thing, but actually it leads you into something completely different, right? And then sometimes it leads you back to the main subject, and then sometimes it leads you completely outside the main subject.
So
and
that's why relationship is always complex.
I guess you can say that, yeah. But it can be simple if we want it to as well. So I guess it's complex in the simplified way, I don't know. But in reality, it's really this. So I think this is kind of what I want to share. If when you embark on a project and it gets you somewhere totally in a totally different place, it's totally fine. And it happens to the best of us, it happens to all of us. And it's really a process of how you kind of understand your project and give it time to manifest.
Yes, there's no way to no one way to actually tackle a topic of discussion. Through your exploration, maybe you could find more ways to tackle that kind of topic that you're trying to explore as well, I guess.
Yeah, totally. And that's why this process is, to me, is very important. And sometimes it's really frustrating as well, because it's so complicated. You're so tempted to branch off into something else because it sounds so much more interesting, and then how do you pull yourself back, or do you let yourself go? So these are the decisions that we kind of learn to make as we go along. And I really wouldn't say there's a right or wrong. I would say give it time, because usually time will kind of give you a certain amount of clarity for you to make that decision. I think the next point of my, I guess, work process in that sense is this thing called interest, and everybody has an interest. But actually, what does it really mean to a creative person, or to anybody who is pursuing something that he or she is interested in? And it's actually, to me, quite a powerful, I guess, simplify it, call it a powerful feeling, because this interest is going to lead you to pursue something, to give it more time, to give it more energy. And that's why it's called an interest, right? Because it's going to be ranked above something else in terms of so many things that's out there.
Yeah.
So although it's an overused word, but do kind of consider your interest, take time and consider what your interest really is, because it can really take you further, give you the extra energy. This word interest, that your interest gives you the extra energy to talk to that person, or to travel to that place, or to pick up a new book about it. So it's actually quite a powerful thing in that sense. This person on the screen right here is one of my, I guess he was my influencer, and somebody that I looked at when I was growing as a creative person. He's a French photographer. His name is Henri Cartier-Bresson, and he is a master of photography of everyday life. And what was his interest? Well, his interest was really everyday life. His interest was simply going out on the streets to take pictures. One man, one camera, a couple rolls of film, and he's out there making, documenting and making pictures of life on the streets. And it's very simple stuff, but to me, it fundamentally kind of changed how I see the world, in that sense, how something as simple as just walking down the streets could have profound effect on this man, that he made a picture out of it, which later had so kind of enthralled so many people in looking and taking up photography. But of course, Bresson didn't just stop at the streets. He was also, I guess you would call it, a photojournalist. So he did kind of covered subjects for magazines and newspapers, and he photographed anything from the streets to, he traveled the world. He went to the slums of India, all the way to China, and he photographed everyday life and make it intriguing. I mean, it was intriguing to me as a young creative person who was looking at these pictures. Like, it's almost that there's this kind of fantasy world out there waiting for me to go explore. I think that really got the travel bug in me as well. And it's like, okay, I want to go out there and I want to start making pictures of my own. So, I mean, quite obviously, it turned me into an image maker. Okay, so it turned me into a photographer. So I want to go and be like Bresson, right? Go travel, go, capture images and understand and explore the world that was outside. And of course, I went to, in places which I thought are gonna be, really amazing to take pictures. And of course, one of the closest place here is, the famous Angkor Wat. So I went to places like historically important places to photograph. But of course, as a photographer, I grew, and I joined as a professional. I became a newspaper photographer, and I photographed news, and that brought me to even more places. And this, for example, was in East Timor. I guess, yes, you could call it an assignment. But what always happens is I try to go make my own photographs after the assignment.
Oh, okay.
And I love photographing people and
Portraits.
and yeah, doing portraits. So I mean, I went to, this was in the Thai-Myanmar border. So I also visited refugee camps like this, brought me to disaster zones. So this was a 2004 tsunami disaster that hit Aceh, Indonesia. So as a news photographer, you, in the end, always have to photograph politicians, and I had to photograph a lot of them. This is Donald Rumsfeld, the then Secretary of Defense for the US. And of course, you have to photograph your local politicians. And I mean, I was very lucky to have the opportunity to photograph Lee Kuan Yew, one of the many photos I have. Could you just give me a minute? So sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, got pressing questions. Yeah, okay.
So I guess taking photo for the news must be very different from the written pieces, and someone else choose, they will choose what to use. And then I guess you have to give them more options in terms of that. Were there creative challenge when you try to navigate around this?
Creative challenges in photography assignments, you mean?
Yeah, photography assignment for news.
Oh yeah, I mean, of course, I think with any creative project, there's always these challenges, because it comes down to doing like an assignment, meaning to say, even when it comes to a design brief, for example, there's so-called the other party that you have to deal with, right? If you are a designer, then of course it's your client, and then as a photographer, the publisher would be the person that, or the editor would be the person that you kind of spar with, or have that so-called challenges in deciding how you edit your photos. And that's where you kind of, I guess, for a simple word, fight for what you believe in terms of your images, and just kind of share with your editor, this is kind of a better image, you feel, because it shows certain things. And because you are on the ground, right? You understand the situation better. The editor is not on the ground, but the editor comes with a different set of agenda. Yes. So this is where the sparring begins. Oh, okay. Actually, it is common, but I wouldn't say it gets to a point where, it's going to be something that you have to quit your job over. It's just something that you constantly have to look into and understand where the editor is coming from as well. Yeah.
So I guess it's the relationship with the editor and you, who has a, if you know this person has this particular style of writing, then probably you will work towards that.
Yeah, totally. And that goes with most other creative assignments, right? The client that you work with for a long time, you probably know the client's agenda, the client's kind of style as well. And sometimes it's like red wine, it's like wine, right? The relationship gets better and better and better, because both you and the other party kind of get into sync more and more. Of course, it happens the other way around, where these two persons will never work together again.
That's also
right. I mean, this is just part and parcel of being a creative, right?
Yeah.
So this is more portraits. This is of my master, my sensei, my teacher, Mr. Skandar Jalil. He's a potter, and I photograph him a lot because his studio is always a place of solace for me when I go and I visit him, and it's always nice to see him again and talk to him. And so I always take the opportunity to photograph him. So I've been to the tough places, but I've been to really beautiful places as well. And that's the perks of traveling as a photographer as well. You don't always just go to the dark places, you get to go to the beautiful places.
Oops.
But then we come back to the dark places again. This is in Surabaya, Indonesia, where there was a mud volcano that exploded.
Oh, okay.
So then it was a drop. Oh no, it looks like a drop, but no, it was a mud volcano that exploded and kind of covered the entire town full of mud, to a point where people had to really evacuate the town, evacuate their homes. Then you can't walk, and the whole streets just look like that. This one, I guess, is more quite topical now. Julie, can you guess what scenario was this?
Is it a clinic?
Close.
Mortuary. Oh, where is this place?
So this was in 2002 during SARS in Singapore, and this was in one of the hospitals in Singapore.
Oh, okay. So yeah. This box is very interesting. This is where they pass their documents across to the next room, I guess.
Yeah, so what happened was the hospitals had to isolate themselves, and it's a little bit like now, right? We have to kind of close down measures. So the hospital themselves had to kind of build these temporary walls within the wards, so that the nurses from one ward, they reduced the chances of the virus spreading, but they still had to pass documents between each other. So they built this little hole in the walls which they could still communicate, but they couldn't physically go through. So as a photographer then, I mean, I went into the hospitals when everybody was running away from hospitals, because I really was interested to know how the hospital was coping, how our frontliners was coping, and I felt that it needed to be documented and to tell that side of the story from within ground zero. And to me, again, it was also an eye-opening, but of course it was really, really scary at the same time. So this is kind of give you an idea of what possibly could be happening also within our hospitals right now. I mean, I think there's also a lot of tension within that, and the fact that how we need to, you know, really respect our frontliners, that for them, you know, putting their life on the line every day.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'm just going to share now about my interests, right? And, you know, going through my career as a photographer, seeing so many things, what I found really came back time after time was nature and the natural environment. And if you give me a choice, I would want to be like that man in that photo, just sitting on a stilt in the middle of a mangrove forest fishing. And that's
I'd like to ask,
yeah.
What would you say is your proudest moment of your career in the news photography? If you want to pick one photo that will represent what you stand for forever, I guess, is it the environment?
I don't think one could stand out more than the others. Of course, there are certain highlights, like photographing Lee Kuan Yew was one of my highlights of my time shooting for newspapers and magazines. But I feel everything kind of contributed to my entire experience. And the fact that I always came back to the natural environment was just something that kind of by chance, really, that I felt that I always was on the lookout, or I just kind of very readily always agreed to assignments or photographic projects that involve the natural environment or involve animals.
Okay.
Yeah, but then when later when I trace it back to why I might have this kind of interest, always comes traced back to my childhood, right? And I think it's probably similar to all of us, and how I was exposed to the natural environment a lot as a young boy. And in a way, it just kind of like the heart, right? When I'm able to travel to a place where I'm going to talk about or photograph or document something about nature, it's always something that is closer to my heart. I always get very excited about it. And that's kind of when I start to see that this is really my interest. This is something that I always kind of fall in love very easily with these places that I visit. How I kind of decided I want to kind of continue this interest was to photograph animals, and I think this is kind of where I think I will share at this part of my career, where I just started photographing a lot of animals. But I want to point out this point about looking at the obvious, because of course we know that there are a lot of amazing photography out there about animals. And so, I mean, for me, it was how I could find a voice within this, how I could photograph something differently. And I decided to look at something that I decided to look at things that were obvious, things that were maybe photographed or nobody really got interested at photographing. It was the fish at home, the lohan fish, at that point.
Craze of lohan fish period.
Actually, the craze by that time was already died down. But there were, of course, some few enthusiasts, like friends of mine who had it. But they looked kind of sad sometimes in their tank, because they're like, sometimes it's just like not well taken care of.
You're not giving them any 4Ds, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I decided, it's like, okay, this thing is so common and obvious, and everybody knows about it. But does it have a different side to it that people haven't seen it before? So I decided to photograph just kind of ornamental fishes in Singapore, that they had a certain personality, they had certain behaviors. And these are the things you only find out when you look at something very, very closely or spend time staring at it. And you start to see behaviors like this, of the common goldfish, or you start to see personalities. But these images were not like, I did not doctor in or did not Photoshop in their expressions. They are what it is. This is how they really look. The only thing I probably manipulated, you could say, are the backgrounds, where I placed a white sheet of plastic into the water so that I can get a very clear background so I could photograph the fish against them. And I wanted to do that because a lot of people kind of ask me, hey, so why are they against a white background? Shouldn't be, they are in a natural environment and all that. So, yeah, I mean, of course they could be. But what I was really interested in is in very specifically in the animal itself and their behavior and how they, you could say it could be a very kind of clinical and scientific way of looking at these animals again. Obviously,
that we noticed that the goldfish has traveled to Tiong Bahru Post Office, and right, I guess this work was presented previously at Tiong Bahru as well.
Oh yes, it was at Tiong Bahru Post Office for a while. We had it up there for quite a while, and actually, what I'm going to share next, the chicken series was also up in Tiong Bahru, and so after the fish project, I asked myself, what are the other obvious thing that I could go photograph? What is the other obvious animal? And by chance, I came upon chickens. So chickens might not be something that is absolutely very common in Singapore, although you can see a lot of them now actually running around in the wild. But the only time we face chickens all the time in Singapore is at the coffee shop, right? When you buy your chicken rice. Yeah, our food.
Chicken rice.
Yeah. But when you ask people how does a chicken look like, everybody knows how a chicken look like because
I think the younger generation didn't have the chance to see the chicken in the market as well, I guess.
Yes, that's another aspect of kind of our interaction with wildlife in Singapore, right? And how we might kind of perceive it visually. But to me, the chicken was unique in the sense where it was something that was not, it was an animal that was not common in Singapore in the sense that not common as it is, not common in the wild, as opposed to cats, for example, as opposed to dogs.
Yeah.
But yet everybody knows what a chicken should look like because we learn it in school. Personally, I wanted to see if there were aspects of the chicken that I didn't know about. That what could it really look like? Did we miss something? Did I miss something? And so that's where I went out to photograph and try to look for chickens to photograph. And I spent almost a year and a half in Malaysia, where it's a little bit easier to find chickens to photograph. I'm going to show you a short video here of that process, and then we can talk about the pictures. It's a long video, so I'm just gonna fast forward it to about here.
When was this?
Organized specifically
2000.
When or where?
When?
What happens is everybody brings. This is about 2010. It's judged by several experts. The chickens are brought one by one onto the table to be scrutinized by the judges. And they will look for several things. For example, their feathers, the colors of their feathers, their combs, how the chickens strut across the table. Basically, the spirit of that little chicken itself, how it brings forth and how proud it is. The owners want to see them as warriors, kind of soldiers that are going into battle because of the way they stand. And I guess that's kind of a strange image you want to project into a chicken. But when you actually see the ayam serama and how they carry themselves on the little stage, you kind of get the idea why they have this type of image. I was introduced to Pupu Nizam through an ayam serama enthusiast. He told me that I have to meet this guy. And so we traveled all the way to Terengganu, where Pupu Nizam is a well-known ayam serama breeder. He makes a living selling ayam serama chickens to collectors, to enthusiasts. It was another surprise that when I got there, because before I went there, I had the impression of him living in a farm with huge chicken. Yeah, so it gives you an idea of like my journey into that, and how I went to seek out these chickens, and of course, like I was explaining earlier, one thing led to the other, because of the impetus of the project was to photograph and understand how a chicken looks like, right? Re-look in a way, really looking at this animal again. But of course, in that process, then you understand about and you learn about. So I learned about so many things. So for example, there's this chicken beauty contest that happens in Malaysia and I think in Indonesia as well. So you have dog shows and you have cat shows. So there are so-called chicken shows, chicken beauty pageants that happens in Singapore. In Malaysia and Indonesia. But what more beyond that was what intrigued me was the relationship these grown men have with a chicken. And these things, as you can see in this image, these species of chickens known as the ayam serama, they are the smallest bantam chicken in the world. So they can fit almost into the size of your palm, your hand. So they were these small, delicate creatures, but they were all these men who took so much into caring for them, grooming them, and that was another aspect of this project, which I didn't foresee that I will learn about or explore about. That came up. So again, it's the process of exploring, understanding, this going between these two entities.
So do you prefer consistency or spontaneity in your creative process? Which one do you think works best when you are trying to create an image?
I think you have to ask me on the day itself.
Oh.
Because sometimes you don't want surprises. Spontaneity is great because then you learn about something new. But as I think a lot of photographers or a lot of creative people out there who are working, you also don't want surprises, because surprises potentially could mean that you spend more money. Because, for example, if the person you're supposed to meet doesn't turn up, and then the person gives you a call, so you have things like that happens. But after the 3 days, he came and then we finally met. Then he told me, oh, because he was late for 3 days because he grooming and taking care of new chickens that came out. So I was able to photograph much more than I expected. So you could call that like a happy accident. But of course, then that added to the cost of the project. In the beginning of the project, it was entirely self-funded. So it's something that we have to deal with all the time as creatives. I mean, I'm sure you know as well that watching the budget is, especially if I'm footing the bill myself and funding myself through this project.
More uptight.
Yeah, things like that. Because 3 days means 3 more days of accommodation. 3 days means 3 more days of food. Of traveling expenses, and all this adds to the cost. So those style of spontaneous moments I don't like. Other type of spontaneous moments I like. Yeah, so it depends on when and where. So again, looking at them in a very different way, like really just kind of spotlighting them without the natural background again, and forcing the viewer to really look at what they look like and their features. So we look at the obvious. There was one way how I kind of looked at finding things to look at, right? And to photograph or to make art about. But the other thing you can of course look at is the past. And being in Singapore, and in our region, situated in our region, we have such a colorful, amazing colorful past. So this man you see here, his name is Alfred Russel Wallace. He's a self-taught naturalist. He did not go to school to study science or biology. He's a self-taught naturalist, and he's actually one a lot of people really don't know about him. But when you mention the word, the guy on the left, so the guy on the right is Wallace, right? From the guy from the previous picture. The guy on the left, I'm sure you know who he is. Any idea? No? Okay, so the guy on the left is Charles Darwin.
Oh, okay. Now that you mentioned, yeah.
Yeah, right? So everybody knows who Charles Darwin is. The guy who was the architect and the guy who founded the theory of evolution. But why are we talking about Wallace, or why was I interested? Because Wallace worked and lived in Singapore for a period of time. Wallace is very well known for documenting and collecting specimens and discovering animal specimens that are in our region. When I say our region, I'm talking about Southeast Asia. And he traveled extensively in Indonesia. Singapore he collected a lot of specimens and animals as well. And of course, he was very amazed with the number of beetles we had in Singapore. And this is circa around 1850s. And Singapore was like his base. And from Singapore, he would hop to Indonesia, Malaysia, and then come back to Singapore for a few days. So Singapore was almost like his base. So one of the things that Wallace was here was how he made a living was he collected specimens and then he would sell them to collectors in the UK. So this is how, some of the whatever that our colonial masters have came to our land to collect and put in museums and bring it back to UK and display them for everybody to see in museums. And this is another related aspect of Wallace, of natural history, that I'm super excited and interested about, and how we love to appreciate nature in many ways. Some other people also love going to looking at animals and specimens in a museum, in a preserved manner, in a manner where they are placed in almost like a systematic, non-natural way of displaying animals. So a lot of people would rather view animals like that, or in a safe environment, and it also gives people a chance to study and understand about our natural environment by looking at some of these collected specimens. And it plays a very, very important role in understanding our environment. So natural history museums play a really important role for us to understand that. To me, what's really interesting about how it was also one way of taking it from another perspective was how we love to, like humans love to control nature and kind of organize nature to our liking. Right? So there was one thing that kind of stood out for me was Wallace's letter to his mother. So this is a very short excerpt, and one phrase that stood out to me, because he was describing his day when he wrote this letter to his mother, and one phrase that stood out to me was breakfast at 8 and out to the jungle at 9. And that was how the title of the show, or the title of the project, came about. In the end, the title of the show was Breakfast at 8, Jungle at 9.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so I wanted to kind of replicate this control we have over animals. And this is where I kind of photographed a lot of the specimens from the museum and kind of organize them in a way that we love, in a systematic way. When we say love, I mean like humans. We love everything to be organized and clean. And I was like, okay, can I present these specimens in a very organized way? So that was how one of the thought process behind this work. Yeah. I mean, you could very easily do this with a program, with Photoshop or with Illustrator. To me, what was important to show was the very specific scrutiny, the very specific line of placement, the clinicality of looking at animals came through in that. I was trying to put that through by kind of very unnaturally arranging something that is natural.
Wow.
But I always place a little message in my work somewhere. And this is where as much as you can see from the very first glance that everything is very organized, but there's actually something that stands out within. There's wrong. There was not part of the whole group in each of these things. You see it, right?
Yep, I see it.
So like, for example, this particular piece, if you look at this one, it's actually the only one that is different from the rest. So every piece has one that stands out.
Yeah. Now that you mentioned, I kind of like try to zoom in.
Yes. So it was my way of just kind of saying that actually, no matter how much we try to control nature, it will not be allowed to be controlled by us, no matter how much it will always try to find a way to
correct itself.
Yeah, or correct us, I guess you could say. This work led on to a bigger piece I did for the museum. So if you go to the Lee Kong Chian Natural History Museum, you would see that this is on the first thing you see when you walk into the lobby. And again, I mean, I was thrilled to be able to work on this piece with the museum and to be able to kind of share my vision in a hollowed place of such scientific study. What was interesting, again, I tried to put a message in here. And you could see that the piece had right in the center of the piece, there was this white color void, right?
Yep.
Can you see that? Yeah. And I purposely left that void blank because I knew that, or I suspected that this would be a place that people would photograph themselves, right? And when they visited the museum. But I wanted to see where they would place themselves standing
in front of the mural.
In a mural. And of course, everybody very naturally, if you do a search, Lee Kong Chian Natural History Museum on Instagram, you would see all these images. So very naturally, people would place themselves in the middle.
Wow.
Right?
And you make it at the height of the human height.
Yeah. Why? Because I really wanted to see if it was true. Because there's one saying that humans love to think that we are the center of the universe, that we control the world. So everything else is below us. So I think it was just maybe a very cheeky way to kind of test this theory. And of course, most people will just very naturally stand in the middle and photograph themselves,
Well,
most
you
people.
keep that place void. Of course, everybody will place themselves there.
Yeah, I mean, true. I mean, that's of course true. But why wouldn't someone just stand at the other end of the mural is 12 meters long. There's so many other interesting places you could step on, photograph yourself at. But yeah, of course there are a lot of reasons why somebody would stand there and photograph themselves. But it was just, something that I thought it was fun to kind of see what was the result.
Test your theory.
Test my theory. Yeah. The show went on, the work went on to become an exhibition in Objectives in Singapore, and it was also the show kind of manifested in different ways where it kind of became a little bit more sculptural in that sense as well, where I turned the images, the animals I photographed into stickers, and people were able to take these stickers and apply it to the objects in the show. It was my way of saying how much do we want for our built environment to be wrapped or surrounded with natural elements. So from that, this is something that's very much more recent, the work that I'm working on right now, which again involves the environment, but this time it involves the oceans, something that's again very, very close to my interest and my heart. And it's also another kind of way to kind of approach a project for me as well. So we had, looking with the fish and the chickens, we had about looking at the obvious. With Wallace project, it was looking at our past. With this current project, it was about whether I could get people to participate in what I do. And it wasn't only just my voice. Could I have a dialogue with people about this project that I'm interested in by asking them to participate? So the project was very much about ocean plastics, plastic pollution. And this was the research site which began the whole project, and was in Pongo Beach. So Pongo Beach is about 750 meters long, and it's situated at the Straits, the Johor Straits. Of course, my first interest was trying to research and understand about ocean plastics. And we are all familiar with those trash, right? Those big, the plastic bottles, the plastic bags, the plastic trash that get washed up every year. But I always wonder what happened to them after they get washed up. Of course, we know that there are a lot of hardworking cleaners employed by NParks to clean up all this, so that when we go to the park, we don't see as much, or we don't see them at all, right? But yes, a lot of it is cleaned up, but actually a lot of it gets washed back into the ocean because there are a lot more in the ocean. But when you are out at sea, you don't really see these floating around that much. There are a couple of reasons for that. And one of it is sometimes it gets submerged into the water. The other way, of course, it breaks down. And all plastic breaks down, right? And it breaks down into something called microplastics, which are these little bits and pieces that you see here. Sometimes they get washed up back into shore. So if you actually go down to the beach today and dig a handful of sand and look at it closely, more likely than not, you will see bits and pieces of plastics like that. And microplastics are termed microplastics because um, they are known as plastics that are between 1 to 5 mm. So you can imagine a 1 mm piece of plastic is that small, and sometimes it's really, really difficult to see it. That's why most of the time we don't realize that they are there. And this again, this is something that I kind of learned about, and it intrigued me a lot, and I started collecting them myself to photograph them. Again, going back to this thing about looking at the obvious, right? So I was really interested to know what they really, really look like. So I put on found a close-up lens and I photographed them extreme close-up. So these are microplastics that are between 1 to 3 mm.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. So if you take your ruler out and you imagine what is 1 mm and what is 3 mm, this is what they look like. And they can go smaller. They can go below 1 mm, which you start to term them as nanoplastics.
Nanoplastics.
Yeah. And yes. And of course, this is a lot of current research are going into this now and how it affects our health. Why is it affecting our health? Because it's in our water, it's in our food, it's everywhere, it's in our bodies now. What we don't know is how it's affecting our health. So that's a big question mark right there.
That stressed me out actually.
Yeah, I know, it stresses me out, it stresses a lot of body out, a lot of people out as well. So the process of collecting and photograph, through that process of collecting and photographing, I was hooked and horrified. And as I was learning more and more about plastics and microplastics, and I decided that since if it affected me this way, how could it have affect other people? So I started to devise a way where how I could bring this experience and share this experience through an artwork, through an installation. By offering people a chance to be able to remove microplastics themselves. And I thought of this, I created this table, which I call the shore debris table. And on top of the table are filled with debris that I collected from Punggol. And what you could do is you could sit there and there's a plate in front of you and a pair of tweezers, and you can sit there as long as you like, and you could remove microplastic, and these are exact same. These are not planted by me. It's not something that I buy plastics and I cut and I throw it. Yeah, no. So these are what I collected as how a cleaner would collect debris from the beach every morning. This is how I collected.
So these are actual sand sample that you collected along Punggol Beach?
There's very little sand. They're mostly debris, what I call they're like flotsam. So they're wood pieces, a little bit of stones, but a lot of what we call smaller trash items, and of course microplastics. Yeah. So I designed this almost 9-meter long table and put 18 chairs around it and 18 plates and invited people to sit on it. Why a table? Several factors, because I think tables are where people can discuss and talk about and meet. And if I want to get people talking about this thing, why not build a table where they can sit and talk about it? Whether they agree or don't agree, sure, that's for them to decide and talk about. But it was a way to get people to start talking about it and understand it.
But subconsciously, are you trying to tell people that they are also consuming microplastic because you gave them a plate?
Yes. So there was, I guess, another kind of hidden message or a way of kind of sharing about that little fact that we are eating plastics. That's why the dining plates. So we were lucky to be able to travel the table to many places, and a lot of people saw the value in interacting with the artwork and give us the opportunity to exhibit the work. And we really hope to bring the table to more places. There's so much really debris and so much microplastic within the debris actually to be picked. Following that, along the way, we created a second table which we could travel because we were invited to the Georgetown Festival in Penang to show the work, and we had to kind of create a separate artwork to show there, something more portable, but in the same vein. But this time talking about the Singapore, because those debris that were on the first table were from Congo. The second table was more like about Malaysia, Singapore, which was why this work was titled the Shore Debris Table Malaya. So carved onto the wood is the entire coastline of Malaysia and Singapore. So myself and a friend of mine, Sam, he's from Malaysia. We worked together on this project to basically carve the entire coastline onto the wood. And the wood is actually a floor plank from an old fishing boat from Pontian that we found. And we filled the coastline with sand and debris from all this coastline throughout Malaysia and Singapore. And we exhibited the work. This was in Georgetown.
What was that blue cloth over there? I saw there was this like blue gradual.
This one?
Yep.
Good spot. So it's a flag. We work with another good friend of ours who is a fabric artist.
Oh.
And she works with indigo dye. And I asked her if she could help me create this flag for this artwork. And I knew I wanted the artwork to the flag to kind of signify
ocean.
The ocean, right? And so if you see 70% of the flag is blue, while the 30% is white. And because 70% of the earth is our water.
Yep.
It's this precious resource that we have. And to me, this flag was almost like us planting our flag in this cause, to share the artwork, to share about this issue through the artwork.
I see. Okay, that's an interesting piece.
Yeah, not many people ask about the flag, but good spot. Yeah. So this is a short video of the Malaya table.
So where is this place actually?
This video was filmed in the east coast of Malaysia.
So these are the sands that you collected along. Wow. Actually, if you don't scoop it out, you don't actually notice that there's actually quite a lot of debris.
Yeah, and a lot of them are buried maybe just a few centimeters under the top layer. And you start to see quite a bit of them, especially if you look at the tide line when the high tide comes in. So this one is a standing kind of interaction. So there's no chairs. You actually interact with it by standing. And this one is about 10 meters long.
I see. I remember that they were given a small cart and then they were asked to stick the debris. So
if there were people who were interested to kind of take back the debris with them, the microplastic bits with them, we encourage them to stick it onto a card, which then they could then go on to show their friends.
I see.
This was
a way to let them bring it along and then share it.
Definitely. So this is a time lapse of the interaction at Georgetown over, was it 2 days? Yeah.
What was their reactions? During their participation?
It's always, I guess the most common thing was they never knew, a lot of people never knew this thing existed, this microplastic. Everybody knows about ocean plastic, the big pieces of plastic, but a lot of them did not know about microplastic and how it's actually the same thing. It's just plastic the bigger plastics that have broken down, and how then in this case, how this might possibly affect them personally or their health, because it's something that it's in our bodies. It has broken down into pieces small enough to enter our bodies. And then that is where I think most people are surprised and they don't know about. But the real thing, really, the real, I would say, the impetus and about this artwork was also the interaction and being able to be there and talk to people who interact with your art. And to me, that kind of participation was really exciting. Although it's something that is not start out something that I did, early in my career. But then, being in this, making this new artwork, then give me that chance to be able to do that, which was, pretty exciting and interesting.
You're able to have conversations with the participants or the people who participate in your project as well, I guess.
Yes.
You're able to get feedback from people, I guess.
Yep. I mean, you are able to kind of communicate with your audience in that sense. I guess it's just another aspect of putting creative work out there.
I see. So I guess with COVID now, you couldn't travel with the table. I see that you also come up with something digital.
Yes. So this is where I think a lot of us have done in the past year or so, where we have to pivot to something that's more digital, because as you can see, interacting with the physical table out in the public involves so many people, which it's not going to happen again, or I hope it will happen again. When
you will.
we must be optimistic, right? Yeah. So it couldn't happen last year at all. So we had to look at how we could continue talking about this, but through a digital piece. And that was when we created Shore Seekers World. And I guess you could say it's a digital form of the Shore Debris Table.
Yeah, but we've been bombarded with a lot of digital stuff. So, it's very hard to capture people's attention, sometimes it's quite challenging. I believe some of the artists are also trying to solve this problem.
And you're absolutely right. I mean, we are bombarded with so many things now, and everything that is. But of course, then it brings the challenges back to the creative, to us, of how can we make our work and our events, our digital events, more productive and more engaging, so that people who attend will still be able to bring back something meaningful and worthwhile, or at least learn something from it. And we also faced that exact same challenge when we were designing this artwork, this digital artwork, and we asked ourselves how we kind of put in kind of experiences that weren't possibly like what we couldn't do in the physical artwork. Could we do it here because it's digital? And we found several aspects of it. I mean, one was kind of telling these fantastical stories about the Johor Straits, bringing in certain histories. That was one aspect. Then the other aspect was, could we make it interesting and make it into a game where it's a little bit more interactive, that they could kind of sustain their interest? The different aspects we felt that could be things that can happen in the digital realm, but maybe not in the physical realm, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I wanted the game to kind of reflect the real life issue that is ocean plastics. And so basically, a quick summary of the game is you have to look for things in the game. So it's like a treasure hunt, all right? Yep. And there are main two sections. You have to look for the microplastics, answer a question. If you answer correctly, you get to collect the microplastics. And then there are the plastic glomerate stones. And those are I would say very hard to find. And actually, that is the feedback we have gotten so far.
Yeah, I tried it myself. It's very challenging. So tiny.
Yeah, and I can tell you, we have almost 1,000 people who have played the game, and only 4 people so far have succeeded in getting a perfect score.
Wow. We have provided a link at the chat group. Maybe you all can take out the challenge after this session. 4 people, you could be the number 5th.
Yeah, you could. I mean, for me, it was important to reflect the idea that the ocean plastics, this issue, this situation, is not something that's going to be easily solved. In fact, it's going to take a huge, enormous task from all stakeholders. And as we know, getting these 3 groups of people to work together is, of course, usually really, really difficult.
Yep.
But I wanted to reflect that in the game, and that's why the game isn't easy to complete.
Challenging, I can say.
It's challenging. Yeah.
Questions also.
So I just want to end off by just sharing this other word, start. Yeah, I want to share this word, start, and how it's important to actually just, as a creative, to be able to start a project. And usually the start is usually the most difficult, because we always think about, we can do this, we can do that, but then sometimes we get distracted or we are lazy, and myself included. It's not every project that I think of I would do it. Sometimes I won't, because I'm just lazy. But that is really the first point you want to I kind of want to share in terms of doing creative projects. You really need to just start, just go do it, no matter how small the action or the task is. Just go do it. Pick up a book from the library and start reading about it, or go take a walk and write down notes about it. Yeah. But what's also important is restarting it. And why do I say that? Because sometimes when we start a project, it always ends because we find something that maybe it's not so interesting, or we hit a roadblock, obstacles. I mean, there's so many reasons why we stop a project, right?
Yep.
But then it's okay. So we find ways to solve it, but then we will want to restart those projects when we can, when maybe we save enough money or the obstacle isn't there anymore, or we find another way.
Or you rekindle your interest, I guess.
Yes, that's so true, because sometimes it's just very simply as losing interest, right? But like maybe one day or even 10 years later, you suddenly think, oh wow, I find this thing interesting again and I want to do it. So as important as it to start, is also very important to restart a project. Yeah, so thank you for having me today. I just want to plug my projects here. So the plastic project is Aya project, and you can find us by searching Aya project on most of the social media. If you want to get in touch, just write us a private message. And the animal stuff is on, it's called the Animal Book Co. You can also search for that on most social media. You better find us. And yes, thank you so much, Dewey, for having me and sharing.
Thank you, Ernest. We will now open the floor for questions if there's any. So is there any upcoming interesting project that, apart from this digital world, that you're planning?
Good question. I mean, I think one way we are looking at Shore Seekers World is how we could explore and photograph and document other coastal areas in the region. So right now, the game features 2 locations. Of course, Punggol in Singapore and Pendas River in Johor. We wonder how we could use 360 VR, virtual reality, to document more of these coastal areas, so that people can, I guess, in a way, travel virtually to these places and see for themselves what the situation and learn about these areas as well.
Okay, Debbie has a question for you. What funding do you move on to after self-funding at first?
So we are really, really lucky in Singapore to have arts funding, right? And that's definitely the first port of call for a lot of creatives. So National Arts Council offers funding for creative work. That's definitely one thing creatives in Singapore like myself look at. And I think other sorts of funding is, I feel one way is through partnerships as well, because projects usually involves not just yourself. You know, projects can involve a company, projects can involve a non-profit organization, and I'm pretty sure what your interests have, your current interests aligns with an interest of another group or another company. When you approach and you link up with this group, suddenly your resources get more. You know, I have $10, he has $10, now we put together, we got $20. Maybe you can go and do something $20 where both parties can benefit. So I guess partnerships is another way after grants that you can look at how to fund your projects.
Okay. And there's another question. How do you balance between breadth and depth when it comes to creating work around the environment? I mean, I think the issue about environment is there's a lot to talk about. Going deep is so valuable in building connection, yet breadth help to reach more people or interests. So how do you control the balance between them?
That's a really, really good question. I always feel it's a personal choice, and sometimes the situation determines it as well. Or sometimes the situation or the environment or the cause or the issue will determine that for you. Of course, ultimately, the decision lies with the creator. And I would say you don't have to tackle everything at one go. You know, you can always tackle it part 1, part 2, part 3, and all these parts tackle something different about the project. So one way to do it is to break up the project into parts.
I see. Okay. NT has a question for you. Wondering if your team are interested in using art in the mental health space too? Is that?
Yes, I think one of the process I have, I always love interacting or kind of partnering organizations of people who are perhaps outside the original intention of the project. And by partnering people who are outside the intention of the project, really opens up a lot of other opportunities and really interesting ways of looking at the original cause. So if you look at ocean plastics, there's so many ways to tackle it, and there's so many ways to talk about it. I'm not sure how I could engage the mental health space, and I think definitely I would need a partner who in that area, and we can work together. But yes, I think the short answer is yes.
Yeah, maybe NT, if you are interested in that area, you could get in contact with Ernest. I guess today, okay. Yeah, looking forward to that. Okay, I think that's the time we have today. Thank you, Ernest.